I worked search and rescue for almost 11 years. In that time, I've responded to missing hikers, injured climbers, lost hunters, stranded campers, and more false alarms than I can count. Most missing person cases are exactly what you'd expect. Someone gets turned around, a storm rolls in, a trail marker gets missed, panic sets in, then we find them, sometimes alive, sometimes not, but there's a pattern nobody outside the Park Service talks about. Not because it's classified, not because we're ordered to stay quiet. Most of us just eventually learn that speaking about it makes things worse. Every missing person case starts the same way. Every single one. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I thought it was bad record keeping. Then I spent 3 years trying to prove I was imagining it. Now I know better. The pattern starts before anyone goes missing. Usually about 24 hours beforehand. Sometimes less, sometimes more. But it always begins with a report. Not from the missing person, not from a witness, not from a ranger. A report from someone who technically doesn't exist. The first time I noticed it was during my second year. A college student named Emma Foster disappeared during a solo hiking trip. Pretty standard case. 21 years old, experienced hiker, good physical condition, clear weather. She texted her parents from a scenic overlook around noon. By 6 in the evening, she was overdue. By midnight, we were organizing search teams. Nothing unusual, at least not initially. Around 3 in the morning, I was helping coordinate radio traffic from the operations trailer. The incident commander asked me to pull every report related to the trail system Emma had been using. I started digging through our database. Trail maintenance logs, wildlife reports, visitor complaints, normal stuff. Then I found something odd. A report filed the previous afternoon, the day before Emma disappeared. The report was short, only one sentence. Female subject observed leaving designated trail network. Recovery unlikely. No name, no witness information, no employee ID, no attached documentation. The report shouldn't have existed. I assumed it was some sort of corrupted entry. I deleted it from my mind and kept working. Emma was never found. Not a trace. No body. No clothing. No backpack. Nothing. A few months later, another case happened. Middle-aged man. Experienced outdoorsman. Vanished during a weekend fishing trip. Again, we launched a search. Again, I reviewed records. And again, I found a report. Filed the day before he disappeared. Male subject observed crossing marker boundary. Recovery unlikely. Same wording. Different victim. No author. No explanation. This time I brought it up to my supervisor. He stared at me for a few seconds, then asked where I found it. I showed him. The report vanished from the database while we were looking at it. Right in front of us. No error message. No deletion log. Just gone. My supervisor closed the laptop. Then he said something strange. Don't go looking for those. I laughed. Asked him what that meant. He didn't answer. Just walked away. At the time, I figured he was messing with me. Now I wish that had been true. Over the next few years, I started tracking the reports. Quietly, privately. I kept screenshots, printed copies, photographs, anything. Because every missing person case seemed to have one. The reports always appeared within 24 hours of a disappearance. Always predicted what would happen. Always ended with the same phrase. Recovery unlikely. Not impossible. Not difficult. Unlikely. As if something had already calculated the outcome. Then came the Anderson case. That was when everything changed. A family of 4 rented a cabin near the northern section of the park. Mother, father, 2 children. Normal vacation. On the second day, the youngest child disappeared. 8 years old. Last seen near a creek. Massive search operation. Hundreds of volunteers. Helicopters. Dogs. Thermal imaging. Nothing. 3 days later, I checked the database. There it was. A report filed 30 hours before the child vanished. Juvenile subject observed approaching secondary trail system. Recovery unlikely. I printed it immediately. For some reason, I felt desperate to keep physical evidence. That night, I took the paper home. Big mistake. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up. My apartment was silent. Completely silent. No traffic outside. No air conditioning. No distant city noise. Nothing. I sat up. The printed report was lying on my bedroom floor. I had left it in my kitchen. I know I had. Then I noticed something else. The report had changed. There was a second sentence underneath the first, one that hadn't been there before. Observer has acknowledged pattern. I stared at it for a long time. Then I burned it. I actually burned it in my sink. The paper turned black, curled into ash. Problem solved. At least that's what I thought. The next morning the report was back, sitting on my kitchen table, completely intact. That's when I started getting scared. Not because of ghosts, not because of monsters, because something was responding. Something knew I was paying attention. And from that point forward, the pattern started changing. The reports became more detailed, more specific, almost conversational. The next missing person case involved a photographer. Before she disappeared, a report appeared saying, "Subject has noticed the false trail markers." That was new. False trail markers. I had never heard that phrase before. Then another case. Subject followed the fourth path. Another. Subject responded to the imitation voice. Each report hinted at things we weren't supposed to understand. Things hidden somewhere inside the park. And every time I saved a copy, another line appeared later. Always about me. Always acknowledging my investigation. One report simply said, "Observer continues documentation despite warnings." Another, "Observer remains within acceptable parameters." I never told anyone about those. Not even the other rangers. Because by then I had started noticing changes. Small ones at first. Trail maps wouldn't match reality. GPS coordinates shifted. Cameras captured hikers entering areas that didn't exist on official maps. People remembered trails differently. Distances changed. Entire sections of forest seemed inconsistent from week to week. The park was wrong. Not dangerous. Not haunted. Wrong. And the deeper I looked, the more obvious it became. One night, I stayed late at headquarters reviewing old case files. I pulled records going back nearly 40 years. Dozens of disappearances. Hundreds. Thousands if you counted unresolved incidents. And every single one had a matching report. Every one. Some dated decades before our current database system even existed. Reports generated before computers were used in the park. Before digital records. Before some of the victims were even born. That's when I found the oldest entry. The one that still keeps me awake. The report wasn't attached to a missing person. It wasn't attached to anyone. Date filed, August 3rd, 1957. Author, unknown. The report contained only one sentence. First observer identified. Then beneath it was a name. Mine. And that was impossible, because I wasn't born until 1988. But somehow my name was sitting inside a report filed 31 years before I existed. And that was the moment I realized the disappearances weren't the mystery. The reports were. And whatever was creating them had known about me long before I ever became a ranger. The worst part? That wasn't even the first impossible thing I found. It was just the first thing that found me back. The next morning I called in sick. That had never happened before. Not once in my career. I sat in my apartment, staring at copies of reports spread across my kitchen table. 43 of them. 43 disappearances. 43 predictions. Every single one accurate. And buried among them were references to me. Observer. Documentation. Acknowledgement. Parameters. The language felt clinical. Like I wasn't a person. Like I was part of some experiment. I kept telling myself there had to be a rational explanation. A hacker. A prank, a corrupted archival system, anything. But deep down I already knew. Those explanations didn't account for the report from 1957, or the fact that the reports sometimes changed after I printed them, or the fact that I had begun noticing things outside the park, things that shouldn't have been connected. That afternoon I checked my mailbox. Inside was a folded piece of paper. No envelope, no stamp, no indication of how it got there. Just a single sentence. Observer has temporarily withdrawn from active monitoring. Same wording, same style, same tone. I didn't tell anyone. I should have. Instead, I drove back to headquarters. The moment I arrived, I noticed something unusual. Everyone seemed tired. Not normal tired. Exhausted. Like they hadn't slept in weeks. Several rangers looked distracted. One was staring at a wall map. Not reading it. Just staring. I asked if he was okay. He looked at me strangely, then asked a question that made my stomach drop. Have the trails always been arranged like this? I followed his gaze. The map looked normal at first. Then I noticed something. One of the trail systems was different. A section I had worked for years suddenly appeared longer. Not dramatically, maybe a mile, maybe two, just enough to create uncertainty. I walked closer. The ranger beside me frowned, then shook his head. A moment later, he seemed confused about why he was standing there. The conversation ended, like it never happened. That night, another person disappeared. A backpacker, 26 years old. Last known location near the eastern ridgeline. The report appeared 20 hours earlier, but this one was different, much longer. Subject encountered boundary anomaly at marker 44. Boundary anomaly, another phrase I'd never seen before. The report continued. Subject elected to investigate. Then, recovery unlikely. The wording bothered me, not because of what it said, because of what it implied. People weren't randomly getting lost. They were encountering something. Something specific. Something repeatable. Something hidden. And whatever it was, the reports already knew the outcome. For the next several weeks, I started tracking every phrase. Boundary anomaly. False markers. Secondary trail systems. Imitation voices. Fourth path. None of those terms existed in official park documentation, but they kept appearing, again and again. Then came the first voice. I wish I could say I imagined it. I can't. I was conducting a routine patrol near a remote section of forest. No missing persons, no active incidents, just maintenance checks. The radio on my shoulder crackled. I expected dispatch. Instead, I heard my own voice. Not similar, not distorted. My voice. Perfectly. Turn around. I froze. The transmission lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then static. I checked frequencies. Nothing. No active communication. No recorded transmission. I replayed the radio logs later. There was no record of the message. As far as the system was concerned, it never happened. But I heard it. I know I did. And that's when I started noticing another pattern. Every missing person reported hearing someone they trusted. A spouse, a parent, a child, a friend. Something familiar. Something impossible. At the time, those details were usually dismissed. Stress, fatigue, panic. But suddenly the reports made more sense. Subject responded to imitation voice. The phrase appeared dozens of times. Now I understood why. Something in the park knew how to sound familiar, and people followed it. I spent nearly a month reviewing search and rescue recordings, body cameras, radio logs, witness interviews. The evidence was subtle, almost invisible. But once I noticed it, I couldn't stop. People kept describing the same experience. A voice calling from somewhere it shouldn't. A loved one appearing briefly between trees. Someone waving from impossible distances. Every witness described it differently, yet somehow the pattern was identical. The park adapted. It personalized itself, and then it started doing it to me. The first appearance happened on a rainy Thursday. I was driving between ranger stations. Visibility was terrible. Fog covered everything. As I rounded a bend, I saw someone standing beside the road. A woman, dark jacket, blonde hair. For a split second, I thought it was my sister. The problem was my sister lived nearly 1,000 miles away. I slammed the brakes. The figure vanished. No footprints. No signs of anyone nearby. Nothing. Later that evening, I checked the database. A new report had appeared. No missing person attached. Just a single entry. Observer responded to first visual lure. My blood ran cold. The report was describing me in real time, and somehow it knew exactly what I'd seen. From that moment onward, the park stopped feeling like a place. It felt aware. Not alive. Aware. There's a difference. Animals are alive. Storms are alive in their own way. Forests are ecosystems. This was something else. The awareness seemed distributed, present everywhere, like the entire landscape shared information. Every camera, every trail, every radio frequency, every map, every record, connected, watching, learning. The realization destroyed my sleep. I became obsessed. I stopped seeing friends, stopped answering calls, started spending every free hour digging through records. I wanted proof. I wanted something concrete. Instead, I found a room that wasn't supposed to exist. It was hidden beneath an old administration building scheduled for demolition. Official blueprints showed only storage space. But while reviewing renovation documents, I noticed measurements that didn't add up. A hallway ended 6 feet too early. A wall was thicker than it should have been. There was empty space somewhere inside the structure. 3 nights later, I went looking. Alone. I found a door behind shelving units. No markings. No lock. Just old painted steel. The room beyond was small, dusty, windowless, and filled with filing cabinets. Thousands of folders. Maybe tens of thousands. Every missing person case. Every disappearance. Every unresolved incident. Physical records, dating back over a century. My hands are shaking as I open the nearest drawer. The first file I pulled belonged to a missing hunter from 1973. Inside was a familiar report. Same wording, same format, but handwritten, not printed. Handwritten. The next file was the same, and the next, and the next. Decades before computers existed, the reports still existed, which meant something had been creating them long before any database, long before any technology. Then I found a cabinet labeled observers. There were dozens of folders, maybe hundreds, each named after a person. Rangers, researchers, administrators, search coordinators, people who had noticed the pattern, people who investigated, people like me. Most folders ended the same way. A final report, a disappearance, recovery unlikely. And then I found mine. My folder was already there, waiting, even though I had never seen the room before, even though nobody should have known I was investigating. The folder contained photographs, notes, incident logs, records of conversations, even copies of private emails from my personal account. Someone, or something, had been documenting me for years. At the very bottom sat a final page. The page wasn't complete. It looked unfinished, like a report still being written. At the top it read, "Observer approaching boundary event." And underneath that, there was a blank space waiting for the rest. That's when I heard footsteps outside the room. Slow, measured, approaching the door. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to know who or what had been writing the reports all along. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Not past the door, not approaching. Stopped. Like whoever was out there knew I was listening. The room suddenly felt smaller. The air felt heavier. I remember staring at the doorway and realizing something strange. I couldn't hear breathing. Couldn't hear clothing moving. Couldn't hear shifting weight. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Maybe longer. Then I stepped toward the door. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight and pulled the door open. The hallway outside was empty. Completely empty. No footsteps. No movement. No sign anyone had ever been there. But something had changed. The shelving units that concealed the room were gone. Not moved. Gone. The hallway beyond looked different. Longer. I knew that building. I had worked around it for years. The corridor should have ended 20 feet away. Instead, it stretched into darkness. At least 100 feet. Maybe more. My flashlight couldn't reach the end. I stood there trying to convince myself I was disoriented. Maybe the room had another exit. Maybe I had entered from somewhere else. Then my radio crackled. A familiar voice came through. My supervisor. Where are you? The transmission sounded normal. Almost. There was something wrong with the timing. Tiny pauses, like someone reading from a script. I answered. No response. The voice repeated. Exactly. Word for word. Same tone. Same inflection. Where are you? I switched channels. The transmission followed. I switched again. Still there. The same sentence. Repeated perfectly. That's when I realized it wasn't my supervisor. It was another imitation, and it had found a new way to reach me. I shut the radio off. The voice continued. The speaker was dead. No power. No battery. Still speaking. Still asking where I was. I dropped it and ran. I wish I could tell you what happened next in a way that makes sense. I can't. The hallway didn't behave normally. The further I moved, the longer it became. Doors appeared where there shouldn't have been doors. Some were labeled with years. Others had names. A few had numbers. One simply said observer. I passed it without stopping. The voice behind me changed. Now it sounded like my father, then my sister, then an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Every voice telling me the same thing. Stop. Not threatening. Not angry. Almost concerned. That made it worse. Because concern implies understanding. Whatever was speaking understood exactly who I was. Eventually, I found a stairwell. I climbed, pushed through the exit, and suddenly I was outside. Night had fallen. The administration building stood behind me exactly where it always had. Normal. Silent. No impossible hallway. No hidden corridor. No sign of anything unusual. I almost convinced myself none of it had happened. Then I looked down. The unfinished report was still in my hand. I don't remember taking it, but somehow I'd carried it out. The blank section was no longer blank. A new sentence had appeared. Observer entered restricted archive. Below was another line. Observer continues progression. Progression. Not investigation. Not documentation. Progression. The wording bothered me for days because it implied movement towards something. A process. A destination. And according to the report, I was already part of it. The next few weeks were a blur. More disappearances. More reports. More inconsistencies. The park itself seemed unstable now. Entire trail systems changed locations. Maps contradicted maps. GPS coordinates drifted. Visitors complained about landmarks moving. At first we assumed user error, then equipment malfunction, then nothing. Nobody had an explanation. One afternoon, a search team reported finding a trail marker numbered 62. The problem was our trails only went to 48. The marker was photographed, documented, logged. The following day it vanished. The photographs remained. The marker did not. And something stranger happened. The ranger who discovered it couldn't remember where he'd found it at all. His body camera showed him standing beside the marker, touching it, reading the number aloud. Yet he had no memory of the event. Not partial memory. None. As if someone had removed that piece of his life. The incident terrified me, because memory loss had begun appearing in older case files too. Entire sections blacked out by human minds rather than redacted documents. Witnesses forgetting locations, forgetting conversations, forgetting days. And once I started looking, I noticed the same thing happening to myself. Small gaps at first, misplaced hours, forgotten routes, conversations I vaguely remembered having. Then larger gaps. I began waking up in strange places. My truck, remote trailheads, unused ranger stations. Once I woke up standing beside a river at 4 in the morning. No memory of driving there. No memory of leaving home. My boots were covered in mud. There were fresh footprints beside mine. 2 sets. One human, one not. I hesitate to describe them because even now I don't know what I saw. The second set resembled footprints, but the spacing was wrong. The stride length changed constantly. Sometimes 3 feet apart, sometimes 10, as if whatever made them couldn't decide how movement worked. The tracks followed me for nearly half a mile before disappearing. That night, another report appeared. No missing person, just me. Observer experienced first synchronization event. I stared at the screen. Synchronization, another new term, another phrase the reports assumed I understood. The worst part was that some part of me did. Not consciously, not logically, but instinctively. Like hearing a word from a language you've never learned and somehow recognizing its meaning. Synchronization wasn't something that happened to victims. It happened to observers, to people who noticed, people who paid attention, people who got too close. And according to the reports, it had already begun. A week later, I found proof. Real proof. The kind nobody could explain away. I discovered an old security server buried beneath decades of archived systems. Most of the footage was corrupted, but one camera still worked. The feed came from a maintenance road near the northern boundary, a place associated with dozens of disappearances. I reviewed footage from the previous month. For hours, everything looked normal. Then I saw it. A man walking down the road, middle-aged, wearing hiking gear, alone. Time-stamped 3 days before he disappeared. The missing hiker, the one we'd spent weeks searching for. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then another figure entered the frame. Not from the forest, not from the road. It simply appeared. One frame empty. Next frame occupied. Standing 30 feet behind him. Watching. Tall. Human-shaped. Almost. I paused the footage. Zoomed in. The image degraded immediately. Pixels breaking apart. Details refusing to resolve. The harder I focused, the less clear it became. Like my brain couldn't process what it was seeing. Then the figure moved. Not forward. Not backward. Closer. Instantly. No transition. No steps. Just closer. The hiker never reacted. Never looked back. Never noticed. 3 seconds later, he left the frame. The figure remained. Standing perfectly still. Watching the camera. Watching me. Then it raised one arm. Not toward the hiker. Toward the lens. Toward whoever would eventually review the footage. Toward me. The screen went black. The file corrupted itself. And every copy I attempted to make failed. But I'd already seen enough. The disappearances weren't accidents. They weren't even encounters. They were selections. Something inside the park was choosing people. Watching them. Following them. And eventually taking them somewhere beyond the reach of search teams. The reports weren't predictions. They were records. Records written by something that already knew the outcome. And if that was true, then the unfinished report in my folder wasn't a possibility. It was a schedule. And judging by how quickly new entries were appearing, whatever came after Observer Approaching Boundary Event was getting very close.